Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our innovation event as part of the Innovation Week. It's been a really eventful week so far, and for those of you who recall the last live Innovation Week we have, I discussed how I thought that innovation came in all shapes and sizes. And I think it's really important to highlight that throughout the events this week, I've been really struck by the need to underline the importance of people in innovation and making sure that all those people feel supportive to be creative. So, one of the key things around innovation is that inclusion, and inclusion is so important. And I think that being a female in a business world, we often feel that actually it's perhaps that support that we don't feel, it's that inclusion that we don't feel. And what's important to us is role models in that. So this afternoon, I'm going to be sharing and listening with you to the experiences of these inspiring women who have just done that. They have gone out, they've challenged us to think about how much time we spend on innovation and really breaking down the barriers of that and making sure that we can be creative, we can be innovative. So I'm speaking to you as one of the members of Leicester Innovation Board, and one of the messages that's really important to us for innovation this week is that innovation is a state of mind. It's not a product of a process. It's not something that you can only do with certain equipment. It's about how you approach a problem and how you look for solutions. And we hope that Leicester and Leicestershire, by coming together around Innovation Week, we can support you with that. We have a great and diverse creative community who are always coming up with new ideas. And we at De Montfort University are so proud to be part of this. So there's still more events to come this week. There's a virtual tour of the innovation spaces around the city. There's tips on how to encourage your supply chain to become greener. There's a virtual round table hosted by Leicestershire Live around some of the innovation across the county. And I'd like to encourage you to look at the website and attend some more of those events. So there's lots to look forward to. But I'm particularly looking forward to this event because for me, as I said at the beginning, being a female in a business world, we do need to recognise that we need to include each other, we need to support each other, and we need to listen and learn from our role models. So we've got some wonderful role models here for us today. And so I'm going to let my colleague, Professor Rachel Granger, introduce you to those colleagues. Rachel is a professor in urban economies. She works on a variety of innovation and growth strategies. She also works on economic development, and she is one of those role models I'm proud to be working with. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Helen, for that fantastic introduction. And I also want to extend a warm welcome to you all for joining us this afternoon. Look, I sense that the march of change is now upon us. We're increasingly aware of the need to innovate our way out of the crisis through an economic recovery. And one of the main messages this week in the Leicester Innovation Week is about considering innovation, new products, new processes, but also, as Helen just said, new mindsets, new knowledge exchanges, new people, not just in science and technology, but also across business more generally. Innovation is pervasive to all business, hopefully. So what role does female leadership play in this innovation? After all, that's why we're all here today, I think, are we not? If I tell you that at the end of 2019, Harvard Business Review published an article on how to drive innovation in organizations. Organizations, of course, were reported to be worried about startups overtaking them, worried about how to stay on top of technology, how to build a flexible workforce that's adaptive to change. But the answer in that Harvard Business Review report was very clear. Hire and promote more female leaders to drive innovation in your business. In the Global Leadership Forecast of 2018, research also uncovered organisations that were just 30% women in leadership were 1.4 times more likely to have sustained profitable growth. And this rises exponentially with greater levels of women leadership. A study by McKinsey has also shown that companies in their top quartile for gender diversity are actually 15% more likely to have financial returns above their sector or industry medians. Now, collectively, this suggests that female leadership is a key factor in any area's economic recovery plans and organisation's growth plan, and is a key ingredient of innovation performance. And yet only rarely is female leadership part of the discussion or part of the performance indicators. Look, well, I'm pleased to say that this afternoon we have a large audience with us. We have 4 incredible speakers that Helen has mentioned, and we have some time to muse and unpick on these issues. We've put some of these questions to the panelists today before asking the audience to put the questions to them. So please do contribute questions throughout the performance. During the event, we want to explore 3 things: the role of female leadership in unlocking business growth, the leadership cultures and practices that drive innovation, and also how we might empower women for innovation and business leadership. To help examine these, we have 4 incredible leaders, which I'd now like to introduce you to, and in no particular order. First, Dr. Heather Melville, OBE, who is a director at PwC, where she's head of client relationships and people business networks. Heather was awarded an OBE in 2017 for services to female entrepreneurs, diversity in business and gender equality. She's chair of the CMI Women. She's also held a number of senior positions in financial services, including RBS, NatWest, IBM, and others. We're delighted to have Heather with us today. Secondly, Eileen, who is the Managing Director of ER Recruitment, a consultancy located in the East Midlands, specialising in 8 different sectors, including at director and non-executive level. Eileen is a president of the East Midlands Chamber for 2021, where she also sits as board member. Alongside this, she's co-chair for Enterprising Women. In November 2019, she was awarded an MBE for the promotion of female entrepreneurship, and we're delighted to have Eileen with us today for this discussion. Third, Katie Palanksar currently leads the Female Innovators Lab in partnership with Barclays that invests in early stage female founded fintech businesses in New York. Previously, she founded and led data SaaS company Unbound Concepts from ideation to exit. The company's data services, which were used by global distributors, as well as privately owned and publicly traded publishers, to provide free software tools to over 40,000 educators. She lives in the world of idea to execution. Her work has led to new businesses, products, programs, teams, initiatives, revenue streams, and funds within a myriad of industries, from fintech to edtech and data to brand partnerships. She's a first-generation college graduate, committed to mentorship of diverse talent, and we're absolutely delighted to have her today to give some insights into female performance in innovation on the ground in New York. Finally, Heather McLaughlin is a Pro Vice-Chancellor and Dean of the Faculty of Business and Law at De Montfort University in Leicester. She's an elected member of the Chartered Association of Business Schools Council and is chair of its Learning, Teaching and Student Experience Committee. As a Professor of Management and International Transport, she's published extensively as well as in the field of business and enterprise education. She's a chartered accountant and a certified management and business educator. I'm sure you'll all agree we have a wealth of talent on the panel today, which I want to thank again for giving their time so graciously to further the discussion on female leadership in innovation. If I can put to the panel then the question, why is female leadership and innovation important for unlocking business growth? And I want to ask you first, Heather Melville, what your thoughts are on female leadership.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here today talking about something that I feel very passionate about. And I'm also very excited that the De Montfort University is actually a part of Innovation Week, because that is what we need to drive the economy. Let's go back 14 months ago. This country was in a very different place to where it is today. Mums went to work, childminders took care of children, the cleaner came in and did the cleaning, mums did the shopping, and all of the rest of that happened. And then last year happened. All of a sudden, we had these fantastic women leading businesses quite often from their bedrooms, managing and teaching their children to the levels that an experienced teacher needs to do. Running the home, that means the budget, cleaning, everything else that needed to do, being the gardeners, doing the shopping, and on top of that, being a great wife or partner for their partners. So when I think about the year that we've had, those 14 months, that's when we really look and say to ourselves, we have come a long way and a lot further to go. The interesting thing is that many women have probably moved away from their corporate roles because this has given them the opportunity to really think about what really feeds their souls, what are their main skills, not to focus on what they're not good at, but to really focus on what they're really, really good at and how they can make that into a business. I have seen so many women create businesses out of something that we would have just thought about, 2 or 3 years ago. Now that, for me, entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of the UK economy. We could not have managed without them. Those big organisations cannot be successful without having those entrepreneurs. And I often say, when I think of an aeroplane, I think about the big corporate organisation that creates the aeroplane. And then I look down and I think, well, actually, you need the small business to create the bits that go into the aeroplane. You need a small business to create the staff that staff the aeroplane. It will be, a recruitment company. Then you'll need a nice catering business that probably started from someone's home somewhere that actually became the person that catered for it. So for me, innovation is something that we have to really embrace here and now. We've had to see organisations think very differently. Those organisations that were used to walking through the door every Monday morning, sat at their desks, switch on their laptops and off they go, actually, their world has completely changed. They also had to become innovative. They had to feel empowered. They need to empower their people to make them feel that they could be the best that they could be, despite not coming into the office in the way that they were used to doing that. What that's made me think about is, in that whole year, how many of us have learned additional skills to help us be better at our jobs? We've had to network in a way that we would never have networked before. We've had to present on these little screens with all these little grids in a way we have never done before. And had somebody said to us, 14 months ago, we'd like you to be part of a conference, but you're going to be on video, we would have all run away. And so the driving force for me innovation has made us get to where we are. This country has probably had one of the toughest years ever, but actually in some ways, one of the most creative years, because we've had people really start thinking about what it is they need to bring to business, bringing those new ideas to the table. And actually women, I'm going to say here as well, have had to juggle all these balls while still thinking about how they do that. So I guess the thing for me is, if we're really serious about business, how do we keep this going for the next 5 or 10 years? Because we want to see this exponential growth continue. We want to see this innovation continue. We want to see the young women that are in universities having access to role models such as my colleagues that are here, hearing their stories, because the most important thing that drives any change is actually when you hear how someone's done it and how they're doing it and the challenges that they have had, but also the amazing experiences they've had to be able to set their businesses up. I've worked with many entrepreneurs who actually have had to reshape their businesses overnight. So many of them created products and services that had to be sold in a public place, from leading a restaurant to beauty products, and for them it was either, do I just close my business down, or do I really become creative and start thinking about how I can get to a wider market and sell my products and services? Some of those organizations, those big corporate organizations that didn't have that innovative mind, have struggled. Why? Because they thought they never needed to embrace technology. I don't need to have an online presence. Everyone will come to us. Well, actually, for 14 months, no one could go anywhere. So for me, this topic is very passionate. It's extremely timely, and we need to think about how do we encourage more businesses to be bold, to be creative, to be daring. And on top of that, how do we work with the financial organizations to make sure that they put the infrastructure in place that support the growth of these businesses? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. Some really great points there. Katie, can I come to you next? Why do you think you could perhaps introduce yourself in terms of the work that you do at the lab in New York? But it'd be really good to find out why you think female leadership, and particularly for you, female innovation, is so important for unlocking business growth.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Katie Palenchar. I'm currently with Anthemis Group. We're a fintech VC that was actually co-founded in London and now has expanded to the US over the past 10 years as well. And we are a fintech venture capital firm investing at the earliest stages through growth stages of financial technology businesses. And I came into the organization almost 2 years ago to launch and lead a specific fund within Anthemis Group, which is the Female Innovators Lab in partnership with Barclays. And we're investing in and supporting through our lab early stage female founded businesses in fintech. And it's really core, in answering this question to how our organization is set up. As I mentioned, we're female co-founded, but 80% of the executive leadership team are women. We're actually, out of 47 employees, 51% female, 16 nationalities represented, 15 languages spoken, and women make up 60% of the decision makers for actually deploying capital as well. So when you look at the intersections of finance, technology, and entrepreneurship, it's something that is very intentional because these statistics aren't usually represented in other organizations in our industry. And so, if you look at innovation specifically, I would say that if you look at fundamentally what it is, right, like the root of new ideas, new thoughts, whether it's new businesses, new technologies, it's really about, new, right? And how do you bring new ideas if the organizations, if the groups, if the people around the table all look the same, but also thinking of diversity of thought is something that I'm very intentional about as well, right? From everything from backgrounds of universities to, kind of career paths before this. And if all of the people that are pushing innovation forward have the similar backgrounds, right? Have similar thoughts, then really fundamentally, we've just scratched out what innovation fundamentally means. And so, in driving innovation of looking across, not just from a female founded perspective, but from all of these different kind of diversity of thoughts, cultures, backgrounds, geographies, I think it's just so key in how we move forward as innovators and what that really means. And I think also historically it's meant like, oh, we need to bring in some type of technology into the business, or we need to, get rid of this business line and replace it with this. And I think what's really interesting, and I'll wrap up here with what we're currently doing is, Barclays specifically, I sit outside of that organization. I'm employed by a venture firm, but they're forging partnerships outside of their organization to explore innovation, to invest in innovation without necessarily disrupting all of their current business lines, right? And looking where things are heading and realizing that it's not just about, complete change, but what the change makers around the table look like to make that change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point actually there about not being totally disruptive as part of the innovation process. I think we'll come back to you on that point a little bit later on, Katie. If I can move to Eileen now, please. I'm just wondering if those same ideas also apply to the East Midlands case. So why is female leadership so important to business growth a bit closer to home in the Midlands?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Eileen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And as everybody said, female leadership is really important to ensure that a diversity of perspectives are applied to whilst developing strategic direction for any businesses. In today's world still, many women don't always realise their potential. But what actually happens is once the experience of success is unleashed, they have an appetite and a direct route to success. And I think for women, this is really infectious in business. I think when women then find themselves in a leadership role and that their capabilities and abilities are actually quite, undeniable, their confidence really increases. And, speaking personally about me, my success was within the recruitment industry. And at the age of 30, my CEO said to me, "We've got a position for you as a managing director, looking after the Midlands and the southern region of the UK." I won't tell you what I actually thought, but it was something around, wow, I'm not sure I'm ready to do this. And I'm sure, like many of you, the success did continue and my confidence increased, which enabled the businesses to grow. And I think that's fairly indicative of many businesses today. But before today's event, I'm always intrigued by others, but I actually spoke to some women that I didn't know, but that I've always been influenced, in some way for women in leadership. And I said to them, what do you think in terms of your role across the East Midlands are your sort of key traits? Some of the words they've said, which we've heard already today, was belief, having a growth mindset, networking, the right team, emotional intelligence, diversity, getting the right culture, and actually empowering people. As you touched on earlier, Heather, 2019, the proportion of women in senior management roles globally grew to 29%. And this was the highest number actually ever recorded. And it stayed the same in 2020. So whilst we're improving, I think whether it's Leicester or the East Midlands, that there's definitely still room for improvement. So while this can be considered, positive news, I truly believe, and I think Heather touched on this, women entering the workforce, they need to be inspired by other women. We've got to reach out and support our future leaders, because as people that, however we're seen, maybe smashing it as women and leaders in the workplace, if we can identify this and show others how they can achieve it, I think it can truly carve a direction for all young, aspiring women, to be our future leaders of success. I think innovation is a word that's used quite freely. Somebody said to me the other day, it's quite trendy, isn't it, to be innovative? So I think it can be misunderstood. But at its core, it's about the practical implementation of ideas. So, for example, the commercialization around it. It's not just about having an idea. And I think sometimes, people do make that mistake. I truly believe that diversity is really core to innovation and business growth. And in today's business environment, you know, that true innovation, and we can all see it, it really comes from businesses with a diverse employee base. So I think in order to rely on that top innovation, you know, that's going to help us all survive if we've got that talent within our teams. In Leicester, you know, 90 to 95% of businesses are SMEs. Succession planning is critical, especially in a smaller business. In my day job, I see this happen too often. Businesses have a vacancy at a senior level and they look externally to recruit. Whilst my business, that's great. Actually, there's people within businesses that if they're trained, if they have the right coach, which we touched on slightly, you know, they could be ready for that next position as and when it comes about. So I guess for me, looking at women and sort of to answer that question, it's, you know, women, you know, diversity generates more revenue. We know that. Women do think differently. We could say that about everybody, but I think we think differently around emotional intelligence. And I think it's really important that we continue to be role models. The sooner that we have women in more senior positions, the sooner the younger generation, the younger women coming through will truly aspire to be able to do that. And more importantly, believe that they can do it.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Eileen. I mean, I'm really intrigued by this idea that women think differently, and we'll come back to you in a moment actually on that. I think that's a fascinating point. But if I can come to you, Heather McLaughlin, and ask you really the same question and think about it from your perspective, why is female leadership or female innovation so important for unlocking business growth?
Well, thanks, Rachel. As a female leader, of course, I'm going to say that female leadership is important, but I would say that it's diversity also that is important, and I am particularly fortunate to lead a very diverse team in terms of gender and ethnicity, so I am very lucky in that regard. I agree with what Heather Melville was saying about seeing innovation and wanting to see it continue, and really what we've seen over the last year, there's nothing quite like threat for forcing innovation, and we've seen a lot of that, but we do need to make sure that impetus remains, and a lot of that requires us to sort of untap this talent pool of female leaders and diverse leadership. I really want to focus on providing the right environment and culture for innovation and creativity. And certainly what we've learned over the last 18 months or so is that we can be creative to find solutions to some very, very tricky issues. And we want this creativity and this resilience to continue. And I think both of those qualities are going to be extremely important in what is going to be a very uncertain working environment. And, you know, everyone talks about that we don't really know what jobs are going to be around in a few years' time. And what I would say is at DMU, we are very focused on creating a culture of empowerment. And it's extremely important in nurturing and developing staff and also bringing out that creativity. What does that mean? Well, for me, I think it requires setting out a very strong vision, which everyone is involved in and everyone is bought into. And then really trusting and empowering people to create in order to achieve it. So providing the necessary steer, if you like, as needed. But I think the important thing is these aren't solitary endeavours. We do require a team approach to make this happen and use our collective skills to produce the best possible results. And I think part of this co-creation is yes, within our teams, but it's also co-creation with our stakeholders, and that's certainly very much the case in a university environment where we are co-creating with students, the community, and businesses, and we're using this to great effect. And I'll give an example of our Business and Law Advisory Board, which is a great board of people, high-profile people who challenge our thinking. So we will run ideas by them. They bring a completely different perspective to what we think. They're looking at it from a completely different point of view. And that challenge is so important. And we have to embrace that challenge and use it to our advantage. So I think through this culture of collaboration, through the culture of empowerment of team, we've really managed to innovate a tremendous amount, certainly over the last 12 months, and we do want to see that continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. So the key points that I take from that is this idea of vision, co-creation, and talent almost in harmony. And it reminds me a little bit of the discussion that Heather Melville and I had just the other week about this. And you were very keen to tell me about the war on talent. I don't know if you can remember that, Heather, and if you want to say something about that, because you were saying that this war on talent is absolutely crucial to sustained growth.
So I need to try and remember what I said, because I've had several conversations since then. But what I will say right now is that the recruitment houses are very busy because their organisations are saying to them, go and find us some of the best women out there, for two reasons. One, the whole work around gender still needs to be continued, and we still need to have the best people, but creating the opportunities for women to hold some of those roles and allow them to thrive. And the other thing for me is, and we talked about this a little while ago, where men tend to always think about the products, the services, and the market share. Women bring the key thing to the table, which is normally around empathy, but also those skills around developing people. And actually, one of our greatest assets that any organisation has had over the last 14 months has been their people. We've had great buildings, great technology, and some of that technology in those buildings have been locked off. And what we've had to do is depend on our people to become the best that they could be, develop themselves, as well as help develop our business. I can say that within PwC, we have had probably one of our most successful years with all of our people working remotely and working in a way they've never, ever had before. And the feedback from our clients has been outstanding. So the driving force for me is really thinking about, how do we keep our talent right now? Okay, because everyone's ready to open shop and they're all looking out there, and the skills that they're looking for around people who have been able to really invigorate themselves and reinvent themselves during this time. So that's one thing. The war on female talent becomes even stronger because people are now saying, as I said before, these women have been teaching their children, they've been running their homes, they've been doing everything else. Why haven't we had them in our organisations doing the kind of things that we know that they can do successfully? And we'll add to that the war on black talent as well. So I know there's been so much movement because since the whole George Floyd situation, people are starting to look and say, we need to have a diverse pool of people around the table. Diversity of thought creates diversity of ideas. Diversity of ideas creates new business generation. At the end of the day, that's what organizations are looking for. So I'll sum up by saying we want access to all of the best talent. We want to be able to hold on to them. We want to be able to motivate them and drive them and develop them when they come to us. And we also want to make sure that they are seen as role models to bring in the next generation of talent that comes in. So if I'll end with people who look at organizations, they look at the makeup of the people who are in those organizations. They will also look at, has that organization filed their gender pay gap? Because if they haven't, I'm not quite sure that's somewhere I'd want to work. And we're seeing that quite a lot, particularly with the new generation of people. And on top of that, for me, it's about reputational growth right now, right? So the organization that can hold on to their talent and attract more talent and some of the best talent develops a strong reputation, a great brand in the market.
I think there's some really good points there, Heather. You've really sort of set out a framework really to think about this. But look, I was shocked to read in the 2016 McKinsey & Co report that three things really. Women almost never get picked for CEO positions because the odds are stacked against them. 90% of new CEOs are promoted or hired from other supervisory roles, jobs that are rarely held by women. That's the first fact. Secondly, management promotion rates are abysmal. Twice as many men than women get hired as directors, and the position for women of colour is even worse. Thirdly, women are not getting good feedback from their employers. 20% are less likely than men to get good management feedback that actually helps them to improve their performance and to move to those positions. And I'd be very interested, both Heather and Eileen, what your perspective is on that, given your roles. So sorry, Heather, Melville and Eileen. Perhaps coming to you, Eileen, first, because of the recruitment role that you play. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does actually. And I think, you can see that in businesses with, being really honest, and with my recruitment hat from an executive point of view, if we get 18% of women applying for those roles, that's it. In these are positions where, because I think we have to look at when businesses are advertising themselves, things we advise on is, being mindful of that unconscious bias, the words that you're using in terms of who and what you're trying to attract. We just don't get enough women applying, and we've done lots of things behind the scenes. We've worked with some real specialists to say we want to encourage more women, so how can we do things differently? And then sometimes when we speak to women, and this has literally happened last week, and we all know this, a woman will look at a job description or something and honestly say, I can do 80% of that, but the 20% that I can't do is going to stop me from applying for that position. I can see some of the women smiling at that, so I'm sure you've all heard it before. And that's really sad. And this isn't saying that the men get it wrong, but, I've had, men that have said, I can only do 20% of that, but I'll learn the rest once I start. So I think that's the first thing. The management promotion rate, we do see that a lot. And, that whether it's colour, I do completely agree with that stat from 2016. Yes, I think it's getting better. I think women are pushing themselves forward because we're speaking about it more now as a nation, aren't we? So I think women are, more confident to ask the question, why haven't I been considered for this? And the feedback one always makes me smile because women ask for feedback more. That's the only reason I think that percentage is where it's at. And that, again, I experienced that in my day-to-day life from a recruitment point of view. So I think that percentage might sit as it does because it's predominantly women that are asking for that feedback. I don't know if you agree with that, Heather, but
certainly do. I also feel there's a couple of things actually. So what I am going to say, I'm quite biased about this. I used to work for the Royal Bank of Scotland, and I'm delighted to say we have a female CEO there, which is Alison Rose, the first one in that space. So it's starting to happen. What I do feel that we need to look at is what stops women from putting themselves forward. A lot of it is they don't have the networks. And I'm going to speak very candid here. They don't have the networks because they are too busy doing the job and don't believe that networking is going to help them. Well, for the women that are on this call that have aspirations to develop themselves, it's one of the key things you've got to have a very strong network of people which help you, help shape you, help feedback, give you the feedback you need, but also help create those opportunities when they know they're coming up. Because what we don't seem to realize is a lot of these opportunities, even though they may go out for advert, sometimes they are already pre-filled. They already know who they want. They've had the tap on the shoulders, right? And when you've had the tap on the shoulder, normally that means get ready for this, because we really want you to do that. And what we need to do is more women being prepared for doing that tap on the, when they get the tap on the shoulder. I often think, and I'll blame myself here, I'll include myself in this, when we get to the end of the year to do the feedback, we all see it as a chore. When we've got to do our end of year review and write about what we've done, our aspirations, the things that we have done that are different, how we brought to the table, you're all smiling because you're all guilty of it, right? We are all guilty of it. We cannot find the time to sit down and write up the great things we've done, but we can find the time to write up all the other great things that people who work for us have done. So my one thing to all of you is we need to change that, okay? Because if we don't change it, if we don't talk about what we've done, no one else is going to know what we're doing. We also need to really take time, and I would say at least 4 events a month is where you need to get out to be networking. They don't all have to be big events, but once a week, whether it's a coffee with somebody, whether it's a networking event and after work, one, it's a great way to get your profile out there. It's also a great thing to understand what's going on in the market. And it's a fantastic way to find out about new products and services that you wouldn't have the time to read up on unless they were put in front of you. But we've got to do that. And I think the third point is, and I've done this myself, find a successful man to mentor you and sponsor you. A man who has done it will be a man who will show you how to do it and do it well. They'll show you the tricks that you probably wouldn't have known about. I've been very privileged to have some amazing sponsors, men and women, who have pushed me, have guided me and reminded me when I've doubted myself, and there will be times when we doubt ourselves, that we can't do something. But we then need to remember, and I think, Eileen, you made this point very clear, and I hear this from many of my male colleagues. I was smiling when you said it, because the point for me is, when you say that men can do 20% of the role, absolutely 20%. But do you know what? They've got an amazing female colleague or group of colleagues that's doing the other 80% for them. And when they go into those presentations and they're, you know, and they're doing their bid around the role they're doing, they're not thinking, I can't do this. They're thinking, I've got a great team that can help me deliver what I need you to deliver. Now, that's where we need to get women to. We need to believe that we don't have to do every single thing ourselves, but we need to build a team around us, and we need a trusted advisory group that will help shape us as we go into those roles. And my final point is, organizations that are really serious about the war on talent will make sure that they identify who their talented females are. And that discussion is a discussion that happens around the boardroom table. So women in leadership forums are happening. And actually, instead of us finding the excuses, which quite often say, well, that woman's of childbearing age, or sometimes some of them are cheeky enough to say that that woman's of menopausal age. And so therefore, I don't think she's going to be interested in a career. We need to demystify that, get rid of that, and be in a place where we are able to put forward what our strengths are, how we're going to help them fix this business problem that they've got, and at the same time, how we're going to develop ourselves. We've got to invest in ourselves.
Thanks for that, Heather. I mean, actually, that's something that the other Heather was alluding to in terms of De Montfort University. Some organisations seem to be very much attuned to the issue of diversity, but some aren't. And if I can come to you, Katie, just to find out whether that is also the case on the ground with startups. Are there barriers that prevent some of these startups? And do you find that there's a difference in approach by some of the women leaders that you see?
Sure. I think, you know, what some of the ideas that Heather was even touching on even apply to this, right? And I think one of the biggest things that we see are networks and network connectivity to grow businesses. And so I often tell the story that I did not meet my first female-founded technology leader, CEO, founder until 10 years ago, and which really shaped me, seeing that someone that came from a similar background as me had launched a technology company, which really inspired me to say, oh, wow, like I could actually do this. But what would have happened if I met that person, you know, sooner before that? And it's kind of just crazy to think that, you know, in my network, I did not run across any type of leaders in that industry. And so, as you're looking to build a business, right, it's so much about learning. I don't care who anyone is. Anytime you've been involved in any type of launching a business, you don't have all the answers and you're learning, as you go. And I think building those relationships to be able to quickly pick up the phone or ask for advice on a certain topic, not only ironically helps your business, but also helps, spur innovation as well. I think, that is also one of the fundamental reasons that Female Innovators Lab was born, not just to deploy the capital, but what we found is kind of, a cycle that, male-led companies historically have built these networks over the years, right? Maybe they worked in a certain financial institution together, right? They can connect to other sources of capital. And, it's not that it's necessarily intentional anyways, but these deep networks have systemically been rooted in our society for so long, right? And so when we look at it at Anthemis, we're like, how do we break that vicious cycle and create a virtuous cycle, if you will? And that's really what the lab is also meant to do, of helping female founders connect quickly to who they're looking to connect with. Earlier today, one of our founders in the lab reached out and is like, I'm looking to talk to, senior leaders at these 6 financial institutions, and men, women around the table at our organization sat down in a quick conversation. We were able to quickly connect her over email with and doing that, right? And so building those networks continues to be critical. But then, as I mentioned, the virtuous cycle, right? Then what their female founders are doing it for other people, right? So they're having maybe liquidity events in the future where they sell their company. Then they're deploying capital maybe in female founders or helping other female founded businesses. And so what we hopefully see is that this virtuous cycle will continue to pick up, and that network connectivity will continue to grow. And there'll be thousands of people like me that will see other female, and millions, hopefully, female CEO technology leaders, and recognize that they themselves can kind of go out into the world and make similar change.
Okay, and I think that's really useful. And is it worth just asking, Katie, in terms of the female-led, or rather the Female Innovators Lab, is the rationale for that about the organisational setting, helping them to overcome the barriers in the ecosystem, or is it actually that they require very different support because they're operating and their mindsets are different?
Yeah. So I don't necessarily think it's necessarily mindset. I think it's a mixture of both things. So I'm very much about deploying capital, and not just, as it relates to growing businesses, not just about mentorship. You'll see there's a kind of saying that trends on Twitter in the technology and venture-backed world, which is over-mentored and underfunded. Those are pieces of it. So first and foremost, we're looking to drive more capital to business, but then how is that capital used over time to efficiently grow the business? And, going back to those networks, make those network connectivities, right? Technology, for example, building software has been historically a male-dominated field. So if you're looking to maybe bring on a male co-founder who is a CTO, or, a female co-founder, those networks have been insulated often by male networks. So how can we bring in both male and female to help grow technology teams for female founded businesses, get more access to engineers, right? So kind of things that seem so simple, right? Being intentional with them to help founders in addition to capital. I really think it's both things. So it's not necessarily a mindset, but again, access and how the founders are supported going forward. And what we're starting to see more of a drive of capital to early stage businesses, but we're still lacking when we get to those growth stage businesses, where we see a drop off, that female founders are not raising as much capital. And so we have to kind of look at that and go, why? Like, why are the numbers ramping up on the early stage, but as the business grows 5-7 years out, we see a drop off, right? And so speaking of innovation, right, what we're trying to look at and test, and we don't claim to know all the answers, but is that if we can support female founders early stage, does that set them on a better growth trajectory, bring in the networks early, not figuring out how to raise capital as they go, putting investors in front of them. And we're really continuing to track those numbers over time. And for me personally, I love data. And I think the way to drive innovation forward is continuing to track, continuing to look at the numbers, not just from a qualitative anecdotal story, but from a quantitative structure and what those numbers are really telling us, and then adjusting our strategies and our innovation in line with that.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, Katie. And just very quickly, do you think Leicester ought to also have a female innovators lab?
Well,
I think everywhere should have.
I love it. And I think there's so many small ways, right, to, we're formally out there saying we're the Female Innovators Lab, but I think there's so many small ways to like test innovation, right? It's like whether or not, being intentional of having a diverse group of employees or leaders work on a certain project and really looking at saying, hey, who is on this project, right? That's kind of a lab type thinking as well. And the exciting part is that we really are, we're focused right now in investing in US, but we have plans as we grow this to expand into London and Europe. So Anthem, as a whole, and the UK, Anthemis already invests in those geographies, but we're really excited about the potential to bring Female Innovators Lab into Europe and specifically the UK as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. Now, look, folks, while, of course, our panel's been talking, we've had loads of questions that have come in. So actually what I'm tempted to do slightly early, just because there's some great questions here that I want to put to the panel, is I'm going to try and combine some of the questions that I've got with some of the questions that are coming through from our audience today. And the first one has come through from Natasha, who's really asking, have we lost some of the inclusive progress of the last 2 decades as a result of COVID? And I wanted to ask Heather McLaughlin this, because I'd be interested to get your perspective on that, but also to think about whether there are organisational structures and resources that might come into play here that might counter that.
Thanks, Rachel. And it is a very good question. I don't think we've lost 2 years of progress. I really don't. I think, as I said before, I think it's been a huge catalyst for change, and lots of exciting ideas have come out of the last couple of years. So I think we have made a lot of progress. I think what it has done as well is it has got us thinking about the way in which we use resource. So we've been talking about the creativity side of things, but I think there's also the way in which we fund things, we resource things. Have we got resources in the right place? I think we've all started to look at leaner models, and that's certainly true in the university sector. And it really got us thinking about where there's waste, and also are we asking people to do the right things? And I think in any organisation, particularly large organisation, you see kind of job creep, and lots of things happen. So you start off with your job description, you think you know what you're doing. As time goes on, you're asked to do more and more and more and more, and perhaps take on perhaps more and more administration. And then after a while you think, this isn't the job that I thought I was going to be doing. And I think we see some of this certainly in the university sector, where we take somebody on as an academic and then suddenly find that they're actually doing a lot of administration, and that's something that evolves over time. And I think what's happened in the last couple of years, not just in HE but across all sectors, is we've looked at resource, and we've looked at whether we've got resource in the right place, and where we haven't, can we redress the balance? Can we use the talent for what it's supposed to be used for rather than for other things? And I found that really exciting about the last 18 months or so.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And it's funny because somebody else has mentioned on the chat, Lena's mentioned that that actually it's been in the press recently that David Cameron employed women over men because they work harder. And I guess there's an element of job creep with that, isn't it? That's what you're, is that what you're alluding to?
Well, I think it happens. I think it's not just a female thing. I do think it happens, for men as well. But I think you're right in that women are more likely to just take it on and get on with it, and that's certainly what seems to happen. It's quite interesting because I'm writing doing a piece of work at the moment, which is looking at the gender gap in the maritime industry, and that's my area of expertise. And it's quite interesting. It's looking at what drives people into maritime careers, and clearly there's a massive gap, gender gap in maritime. But the ones who do go in are absolutely determined, very, very determined people, and there are particular traits that we're seeing coming through in that regard. And I think there's a lot of this determination that you see in women who do well and break the glass ceiling.
Thanks for that, Heather. I mean, there's been some compelling evidence, hasn't there, that certainly to suggest that innovation is more likely to happen under a female leadership than a male one. Now, of course, one of the problems of that is that it's also reported that companies on the verge of collapse are more likely to bring women in to transform it, in that notion that's referred to as the glass cliff, when women take on the CEO reins, only then to get pushed off the glass cliff. I'd be very interested in knowing from the panel, perhaps starting with Heather Melville, whether that is also your perception out there in business.
So I think you've got to look at this in a different way, actually. I kind of think sometimes you give somebody an opportunity to create something good out of something bad. It allows them to shine. I know from in my own career background, I have taken on either the products that nobody wanted to sell or the territories that no one wanted to do, because that was going to help me develop as an individual, but also it meant that I had extra oomph to say to them, I've done this because no one's done that before. So I think sometimes as women, we mustn't limit ourselves in thinking that actually this is to push us over the edge. And I know that's easier said than done, but I'm just thinking the way that some of the men think. If I think about some of the bold men who have taken on some of the organizations that have actually been falling over the cliff, they haven't let it stop them, right? They've picked it up, but they've made sure they've got a great team of dedicated and loyal people around them to make sure that they build things and build them stronger. And that's where we need to get this. We need to get women thinking. And that's why I also say it's very important for you to surround yourself with a strong network of trusted advisors. They will tell you, first of all, whether or not you should touch that or not. They will also be the ones that will say to you, you need this person to support you in this, you need that person, or you need that person. And actually, you may have to get rid of some people that are working with you because those people were part of the old regime and are not going to work with you. So I think we need to take it away from it's a poison chalice to looking at the opportunity that you can create from it. And once you've done it once, guess what? If you do it a second time, it doesn't feel as painful, right? Because you've done it. And actually, you can take the credit for doing it. And your CV starts to read very differently. Transformational change. Those are the roles that people are looking for. Those are the skills that people are looking for in leaders today. And guess what? Many women have those skills because they had to go through that whole transformational skills.
I think that's a really good point. And actually, Leanne in the chat is asking us a question about where would we find these mentors? So has anybody on the panel got some advice about, where we might suggest that we find these really good mentors and role models? I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come to you, Heather McLaughlin, if that's all right.
Yeah. That's fine. I do think the mentoring is incredibly important, and I'm taken with Heather Melville's point about finding a good male mentor, and I think there's something in that. But I do think it's also important to have good female mentors and role models as well. And I think there's certainly sometimes you have to go out of the organisation to do that, and I think a lot of women find those role models and mentors in perhaps professional associations sometimes, and the networks. And I think we've already said a lot about the social capital element of this and how important that is, and certainly finding those networks that could then deliver a mentor that's going to help you through, and I think getting the right mentor is really huge in terms of and we've talked about it already a lot about self-efficacy and this feeling of self-efficacy for women and what they can achieve, and a feeling of they can achieve it with the right support, with the right level of intervention. So mentors hugely important. Look outside the organisation, I think for mentors as well as in, but also it's just a really important intervention that is needed in order to get where you want to be in your career.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Heather. And actually, Reginda's noted, I mean, Reginda's down the road at University of Leicester. Very pleased to have you here, Reginda. And you've said something about you need a champion even when you take on the risks of those transformative projects. And, is that risky? Where do you find those sort of champions? Are they things that develop as you progress your career, or who are the right sort of champions that you'd need to bring on board with that? I don't know if either of the Heathers can help us out here. I think we're going to go Heather McLaughlin first.
Champions issue is really important. It doesn't have to be one. I think there's tremendous power in a network and perhaps a close network. And if I just use my own example here, through the last 18 months or so, I've been part of a group of about 10 female Pro-Vice Chancellors and Deputy Vice Chancellors, and we've met up via Zoom every fortnight for an hour, and Chatham House rule, sharing issues, sharing pain, angst, all of that has been huge in terms of trialing ideas, sharing experiences, and I think that kind of thing is really valuable, and it just stresses the importance of finding those networks. And it's not necessarily just one person, and I would say a group is better. I
think for me as well, totally agree with that. I think it's also about having a sponsor, right? And that sponsor, ideally, you'll need one in your organisation. So this is where it goes back to doing one of those things that ordinarily you wouldn't have done, for someone to see you've done it, for them to then say, I'm going to sponsor that person, because they are the ones that will have the conversations when you're not in the room about you, that says, I'm going to put my hat on this person because I've seen what she's done. And particularly for women, when somebody says, well, they're very quiet or they don't say very much, because very few of us stand up and bang on the desk and have tantrums, right? We sit in the office, we take the notes, we participate when we need to. And sometimes that's misconstrued as us not having confidence, right? And I'm not saying to people, go and bang on your desk, because that's going to have an adverse effect. But what I am saying is, when you do a piece of work, let somebody know who's going to benefit from that work, that it's your work. They'll start to get used to hearing your name. And then what will happen? They will naturally think, I want to sponsor that person because they're going to deliver that. The other thing for me about mentors, you can have mentors of different levels for different reasons. I've got mentors that are in universities at the moment. They're great on technology, or they've got something else, and I reverse mentor them. So, it's a shared relationship, right? let's not always be thinking that when we're going for a mentor, it's something we want to take from them, offer them something as well. I have also reverse mentored some very senior people. And that is, they've asked me, how can I do this better? Or actually, some of them have just said, Heather, I have a real big challenge. And I won't name them, of course, but some of them have been CEOs of big FTSE 100 organizations. I have a real challenge with bringing in Black talent into my organization. Will you spend an hour going through this with me and tell me really about what's really going on? So, of course, I do that for them, because they're not going to hear that in their own organization, right? Everyone's going to make sure the message that goes up to them is diluted, because they don't want to tell them we've got a problem here. However, in doing so, I've established a relationship with that person, which means that they are then prepared. If I've got a business question that I need to ask for some advice on, I can send them a message and say, can I just get 5 minutes of your time? Guaranteed, you'll always get 20 or 30 minutes. You'll never get 5 minutes, but always ask for 5. And I think going back to that thing around having mentors, you have mentors in your own organization, but they need to be 2 or 3 levels higher, right? Because you want to learn from them. So that's the first thing. Look at how someone is doing something, how they've done it. It could be that someone's really led a big restructure or something in their team, and they've done it with ease and grace, or they've led something really difficult. Get them to talk about it. The other thing is really important for you to know, you have got to gel with that person, because you are establishing a relationship. So there is no point having a mentor that's really high profile, but you do not connect with them, because you're never going to learn anything. You're never going to exchange anything. And the final point for me is, when you are being mentored or you are the mentee, it's really important that you develop and have a thing of confidentiality on both sides. Trust is really important. So, if you're going to be talking to them about things that are personal to you, need to know that you can trust them, and they are going to be sharing back with you hints and tips on what to do. They need to know that that's going to be confidential as well. The last thing they need is you going out there and saying to someone, well, such and such told me I can do this. You've lost it then. So I'll summarize by saying, get known for delivering something that has helped the firm, right? As soon as you do something that's helped the firm in some way, everybody looks at you and they think, wow, how did that person do that? The next thing is, look at somebody that's 2 or 3 levels higher than you, and they could be outside of your organization. I've had mentors outside of my organization, because I need to feel that when I'm having a conversation, it's not going anywhere else, right? So that's it. And the other thing is to look at somebody externally as well, who's really done great things. And don't forget, particularly if you want someone to help you, if you're an entrepreneur or you're just setting out your business, you need somebody who's got real strong marketing skills or real strong entrepreneurial skills. Get a young person and do this whole reverse mentoring. You help them with something and they can help you with that.
I think that's great advice, Heather and Heather. And I think the trust and the Chatham House rules is actually quite pertinent, isn't it? Now, we've had a question in the chat from Simon about, well, that's all well and good if you're established professionally, but what happens if you're just starting out? You might even be looking for finance for a startup. Where do you find those same sort of mentors? Where would you look to in that respect? And maybe Katie can offer some advice here on this one.
Sure. I mean, especially for a startup, I think there's no one size fits all. I think there's a couple of ways to look at it, and going back to kind of diversity of thought of, in your sector, in your industry, looking at people who are in early stage businesses in that sector. Then there's also people that have run businesses as well that aren't necessarily in your sector, that could bring, kind of fresh approaches. And then third, kind of to what Heather was saying as well, like looking at other organizations that would maybe work with your type of business, right? So, give a prime, example, especially with what we're doing, right? You may have an early stage business that's focused on, some type of approach to financial wellness, right? And it's very consumer driven and you're working with individuals, but you may want to also build mentorship within a larger financial institution, right, who maybe isn't working with these individuals, but can give you other insights as well, right? So again, going back to that diversity of thought, I think now, which is super exciting more than ever, and I sound like I'm an old lady over here, but didn't exist as much when I was running my business, is groups already of people that are in similar positions as you, right? So whether it's technologists, whether it's, early stage CEOs, whether it's growth stage CEOs, where it's, there's so many different interesting groups that are happening right now, and taking advantage of those. And also was brought up early, right, is that we're going to see, with everything that has transpired over the past 14 months, we're going to see more and more of that connectivity, I think, pop up. One, because so much virtual, connectivity needed to happen because there was nothing else. But then also now people hungry for putting those physical in-person networks from what they've been lacking. So I think, one way to think of it is not thinking of like one-to-one, but thinking of one-to-many, and then what comes out, what relationships come out of that. From a entrepreneurial founder perspective, I always encourage, founders to build a relationship with other founders, because it's, you're going to run into troubles, issues. It's, one of the hardest things to do in business is start your own company, and just having someone that can pick up the phone and you can call and say, oh my gosh, I've run into this huge issue. Can you help me with this? Can you connect me with the right person? I need an attorney for this. I need even just someone to kind of listen and think through this strategy. And, not relying necessarily of like this one-to-one mentorship, and this is the person I call every single time. Yeah, you may have that, but just that network, that core group. Other people have mentioned it well. And what I find interesting is that so much of the insights that other people gave just don't apply to, traditional employment or certain organizations. Like I love it with what so many people have said today, is like so many of that applies to female situations, no matter where they sit in an organization, right? Just starting out in the career, seniors, starting your own business, executives. And so a lot of that really applies to startups and launching a business as well.
And can I just push that a bit further, Katie, if I may, because we've had a question, which is not that unusual actually, about students. So what you might find increasingly in universities, I'm pleased to say it's definitely the case at De Montfort University, is that you've got diversity of the student base and therefore of potential startups. But where can they go to get some additional advice or mentoring or coaching, which may be in addition to their universities, say?
Love it. Yeah, I think something also kind of to jump on that, like more groups popping up. So what you're seeing in the venture capital ecosystem, for example, is a lot of venture investors, groups, organizations, accelerators, startup organizations being very intentional right now of bringing more, underrepresented founders and realizing all the change that needs to happen there, but also investors as well. So if that's something that a university student is interested in, but then also people that work with startup companies, what you'll often hear is the platform or portfolio success team. There's so many ways other than just investors and founders to engage with startups, and you'll see more and more, just like with the lab, people building teams to help support the startups as well. So what I would encourage is to check out some of these organizations, check out some of the venture capital groups, because what they're building are, Harlem Capital in New York City, for example, has built a whole summer program for university students, right, to be more immersed. It's internships, but not in the traditional sense, right? You have a cohort with you, right? That you're, again, building a network, which is so important, as so many of us talked about, and kind of working towards a similar learning, a similar goal. You're seeing people pop up within organizations, scout funds, right? This is something that's happening where actually giving, small check size opportunities to university students to then go out and invest in companies themselves, right? So learning how to be an investor. And you may ask, well, Why? How does that help? Right? Again, diversity of networks for venture capital firms, realizing that university students, and looking at that as an advantage, have different networks in finding companies, which then drive innovation, right? We're a space we're super excited about right now is finance and Gen Z. Well, how do we do that if we're not connecting with university students, for example? So I really like, from a tactical perspective, that's something that interests you. Take a look at all these startup organizations that exist. Reach out, ask if there's certain programs. You'll find a lot online. You'll find lists and databases that people are starting to build. And then also, externships over holiday periods as well. I often like to tell the story, and I'll wrap up that question with this, is that in my company, I hired an intern that had reached out cold to me for an opportunity, and she actually went on to lead our product team, and now is the female co-founder of a technology business in the Bay Area in California, right? So kind of be a little bit bold, do your research, and find new opportunities, because the startup world is hungry for diversity of thought, and different ages definitely play into that.
That's absolutely great, that is. Now, I can't believe it. We're into our last 10 minutes. And so I know we've got to wrap up, but I also want to go to each of the panelists really to get their thoughts. And my question is really, what are the 3 things that you would say are most important, either for female leaders, prospective female leaders, or established female leaders, in terms of making progress in terms of where we are at the moment? I know Heather Melville's touched on some of these things, but I'd like to get each of your advice in turn, if I may. And I'm going to go to Eileen Richards actually first, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the networking that we've talked about is really important. Not necessarily just networking to sell your own business, but to learn from others. I think networking to people when you first start out is, I want to just go and sell my business. Well, actually, it's you can learn. This is where you can meet potential mentors, potential people that could coach you. I think empowering is really important. We can't all be experts at everything that we do. So it's making sure that we empower the team around us and the people around us to get the end result, really. And this is really basic, but I just wish that I'd perhaps felt like this starting in my 20s. But belief. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will believe in what you're doing. So off the cuff, I think they would be my 3.
Brilliant, thank you. And who wants to go next? Actually, let's go to you, Heather Melville, just because you're next on my screen.
So a couple of things for me. You've got to establish your trusted circle. So decide who you need to be in your trusted circle. So your advisory board, I called it, of you that are going to help you to be successful. Think about how you're going to tell your story about you to people. So 2 minutes flat, whether it's you as an individual, whether it's your business you're selling, know that you've got that elevated pitch in your head and practice it, because you never know when you're going to bump into that special person in the lift or walking through a building, so they know who you are. And there's a very elegant way of doing it. So don't just stop them and say, hey, you, this is who I am and this is what I do. There is a very elegant way of doing that. And the other thing for me is know who's sponsoring you, right? Know who's sponsoring you. And when I say that, is who are the people that you have really done something that you know is going to help them, because they will naturally be your sponsors. And I'm going to add a 4th one, which is just a very tiny one, is please make sure you play it forward. If you're getting mentored or you're being sponsored, you need to make sure that you're doing the same for someone else. Otherwise, it doesn't move. Things don't move anyway.
Absolutely perfect. Do you feel like giving us an example of an elevated pitch, Heather? I'm totally putting you on the spot here, but it might just might give us an indication about how we might do that.
Okay. My
I
name's
can,
Helen
I can
Melville.
come back to you if you want.
Okay. Happy. I'm happy to try it now. Actually, let me just go for it now. Get it right. My name's Helen Melville. I work for PwC. I'm really proud to say that I joined them 2.5 years ago, having had a career in financial service that extends into 40 years. That's one of them, right? So I've told them I'm working for an established organisation where everybody knows you go through extensive vetting and you've got to be the best to work there. But I've also said to them that I have got a 40-year career in financial services.
I think that's absolutely perfect. Thank you. Thanks for that, Heather. How about for you, Katie? What are the 3 key important bits for you?
Sure. I think, if we look at investing in women, not only in startups, but investing in women as employees, as careers, in their careers as leaders, to remember that diversity will not only, the diversity of thought will drive innovation. We've seen that time and time again. There's a lot of statistics to back that up. Rachel, as you mentioned, especially with boards and strategy, that help drive that. But then also, that's number one. The second thing that comes out of that is women seeing other women in leadership, right? And you cannot be what you do not see. So that continues to drive innovation as well. And the third thing of those results, those success stories, those metrics that come out of it will create that virtuous cycle, right? And so it's not just about these 3 things in isolation, but plugging them all in to create that cycle that really affects real change and all facets of innovation.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And finally, Heather McLaughlin.
Thanks. I've had time to think about it, so that's really helpful. Thank you. So I've sort of boiled it down to self-career and self-efficacy, and what I mean by that is when I look, particularly when I look back on my career, one of the most valuable things I ever did was have coaching, because coaching helps you with yourself and your self-awareness, your self-reflection, and also your resilience. And that was one of the most valuable things that I did a long time ago, but it stayed with me. So know yourself, and coaching is really, really important, and that resilience. The second is get good career advice. And whoever that's from, whether that's a mentor or it's a network, but get good career advice and look extensively for it. And then the third thing is around self-efficacy. And I think one of the things to do here, and I think I can't remember who mentioned it on the panel earlier, but this about achievements, and it was Heather. Heather Melville talked about, we don't note our own achievements, and this is enormously valuable for your own feeling of self-efficacy. And sometimes when I've had a really bad week, I will sit down and I'll say, what have I actually achieved this week? Because sometimes you feel like you're rushing about and you're not really getting anywhere. But actually, when you sit down and think about it, you think, gosh, it was a really good week and I achieved all of these things. And I think we mustn't lose sight of that. And that really helps empower us. So they would be my 3 things.
Absolutely brilliant. Look, I think we're very quickly running out of time. I think what I've heard this afternoon in the various questions and answers is, one, a need for recognition in business of the importance of female leadership and unlocking growth. And Katie mentioned in particular the importance of diversity of thought, having diversity of business in order to drive diversity of thought. I think, furthermore, that female leadership actually allows economically an area or a sector to perform at a higher level. And here I'm going to be a bit cheeky, but given that there were just 3 men joining us in this session, and thank you to those 3, I know exactly who you are, I think more probably needs to be done to get the message across in mainstream business terms, not just female groups. I think that's the first thing that occurred to me. I think the second thing is, in terms of career, we talked about the importance of networks, meeting mentors, coaches. empowering, having a trusted circle of people that you can tell your story to get career advice. I love Heather's idea of the elevated pitch, by the way. I'm now going to work on mine. But I think also knowing who's sponsoring you, being aware of the environment that you're operating and using it to good effect, and get good career advice. I think thirdly, at a time, particularly bringing this back to Innovation Week, as Helen was talking to us about at the start, at a time when regions and LEPs, for instance, are developing innovation performance indicators, it does seem to me a bit curious that female leadership isn't on those indicators. And I wonder if it should be, because from what I've heard this afternoon, it does seem to be a relevant indicator of progress. Look, I'm going to wrap up. So this session for me has been both fascinating and inspiring. I want to thank all of you today for joining us and making it a great success. I think what we've learned is that female leadership does have a place in innovation discourse and praxis. If I can end on a positive note, and in the words of Sheryl Sandberg, who you know is the former Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. Surely there's no more fitting connection with Leicester Innovation Week. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Helen for a very final wrap up. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and I feel like I've learned so much, and that's one of the wonderful things I think about working in a university culture is every day's a learning day. And I think the most important thing that I've taken from this conversation is something that Heather Melville said earlier on, and that is pay it forward. I am such an advocate for pay it forward because it pays back in exponential ways. So thank you all, both Heather and Heather. Thank you for your insights. Also to Katie and Eileen, fascinating conversations. And I just appreciate so much your authenticity all through the discussion and allowing us to really understand how innovative mindsets can lead to huge success. And my final thanks to Rachel. What a wonderful panel, what a wonderful discussion. And thank you so much for putting this on for us to celebrate Innovation Week. So thank you all, and please do go ahead and enjoy the rest of the events this week. Thank you all.